and water scarcity. But let's begin, Charles, with allegations of war crimes by the British military.
We will, and in doing so, we'll examine what BBC Panorama's latest offering, I Saw War Crimes, has to say about itself in this short clip from their advertising promotion.
Those who served with UK Special Forces are about to break a code of silence. They don't want to be identified. We've used actors to speak their words, but they want the world to know what they saw.
Everyone knew what was going on. It's not scout camp. Everyone knew what was happening. People were murdered.
The government has set up a public inquiry, but it's only looking at operations between 2010 and 2013. We've been told the unlawful killings started much earlier.
So that's been produced by Hannah O'Grady, who's been the journalist at the centre of much of this type of investigating. And of course, the critical part here, really, insofar as credibility is concerned, is that they are using actors. So whilst on the face of it, it might seem significant that Special Forces veterans have stepped forward, they've done so in an anonymous sense. So it is, in that respect, hard to know what to make of it. I should say that I reported on this last on the 25th of September last year. So there's not enough time to go into all that detail today. So please look back at that news programme for further detail. I'm now just going to show a little bit of video from what the BBC is describing as being from the Special Forces taken in Iraq. And the claims by the Panorama programme are that these sorts of videos were produced by troops and squadrons deployed in order to effectively promote competition between units, most particularly in relation to what they call the kill counts. And so the statistics here being shown on screen that over a 6-month tour, 424 detainees and 19 enemy killed, just as an example. Now, there's no suggestion here that this was an isolated incident, isolated either to the UK or indeed to Afghanistan or Iraq. And therefore, it's relevant to look to Australia, which has investigated this in a more official and perhaps comprehensive sense. And going back to 2020, the Brereton report, which states that credible information existed in 23 incidents in which one or more non-combatants were unlawfully killed by or at the direction of Australian Special Forces, which may constitute the war crime of murder. Now, the Chief of the Australian Defence Forces, Angus Campbell, spoke in 2020, and it's interesting to note the contrast between what he said and what has come from the Ministry of Defence in the UK.
What the Inspector General finds is greatly at odds with that good effort and damaging to our moral authority as a military force. His report details credible information regarding deeply disturbing allegations of unlawful killings by some. I would respectfully ask Australians to remember and have faith in the many. I assure you I do. To the people of Afghanistan, on behalf of the Australian Defence Force, I sincerely and unreservedly apologise for any wrongdoing by Australian soldiers.
The Defence Chief pointed to a culture of what he said was toxic competitiveness between an SAS unit and a commando unit. The allegations General Campbell described as a disgrace to both. He said it was a shameful record. There were incidents allegedly involving patrol members who were coerced to shooting a prisoner in order to achieve what was called a first kill or blooding. We also heard details from the inquiry that found the soldiers sought to cover up their crimes by using what was called throwdowns, those being usually pistols, ammunition, grenades or handheld radios to be placed on the bodies of victims.
So that was a Channel 9 report which becomes relevant because all of this led to a man named Ben Robert Smith, who was then a corporal in the Australian Special Air Service, and we'll just pop him on screen now because he is crucial to what happened in Australia. And there are enormous parallels with what the BBC programme has articulated. But it should be pointed out that Robert Smith found himself at the centre of a defamation case because back in 2018, articles were written by journalist Nick Mackenzie in particular, suggesting that he had been responsible for a number of extrajudicial killings whilst in Afghanistan. And in 2023, he sued for defamation against Mackenzie, but it was chucked out on the balance of probability that he had in fact committed such murders. Now, at the time, Robert Smith was working for Channel 7, a rival channel in Australia, owned by Kerry Stokes, who has bankrolled his appeal, the decision for which is due to be announced on Friday. So it seems beyond coincidence that this could be happening at the same time as the Panorama programme. Now, for much more information on this, I'd point you towards the 60 Minutes programme in Australia, Theatre of War, a link to which will be in the show notes. And indeed, this now brings us back to the UK, because the other thing reported by the BBC is that this man shown on screen now, General Gwyn Jenkins, who's a strategic advisor to the Defence Secretary, was at the heart of this at the time in Afghanistan, and that he had knowledge by way of a report back in 2011 when he was commanding UK Special Forces in Afghanistan, and he sent that report up the chain of command to the then Director Special Forces, who was Mark Carlton-Smith, who went on to become Chief of the Defence Staff here in the UK. What Jenkins is accused of not doing is passing that report to the Royal Military Police for further investigation. And again, I refer you back to my report of the 25th of September last year. Now, Jenkins has subsequently gone on to be Director Special Forces himself and is accused there of overseeing the blocking of Afghan attendees at the inquiry into events in Afghanistan, which has been going on for some considerable period of time now. Now, added to that, he is also tipped to be the next First Sea Lord, which of course is pertinent insofar as Ben Key, the current incumbent, has just stepped down over an affair with a female subordinate, which Brian will talk a bit more about on Monday. And what this brings to mind is the government's decision to repeal and replace the Northern Ireland Troubles Legacy and Reconciliation Act in 2023. So there's an awful lot more to this story than meets the eye, and it's not entirely certain why the BBC would be putting it out now and what there is to it. One possibility is that it does certainly seem to obscure much of what's been going on in Gaza. There is a sort of normalisation of war crimes because there's been a considerable reaction against this, as though this is all part and parcel of the job. So I think there's going to be much more to talk about this in Extra.
Thanks, Charles.